the Hall of Famer sportscaster. He's Bob Costas. Part of MLB Network's Prime 9 Countdown series returns tonight with Bob as the host here, and it runs all week long, ranking first baseman and second baseman tonight at 5 and 5:30 Eastern, MLB Network. Bob, thanks for joining us. If I talked to you a week ago and I said you're the commissioner and you could place Ohtani wherever you want, that's in the best interest of baseball, what would your answer have been?
I think it's probably the answer they wound up with. It's probably the Dodgers. You could say that the Yankees or the Mets, maybe New York gives them a little bit more of it's a larger market numerically, but you want him to be happy. You want him to thrive. I think where they were really holding their breath, and maybe it was just leverage from an agent standpoint, but when there was serious talk that the Blue Jays were in the mix, with all due respect to them and their fans and the history of the franchise, it's nothing against them. That would have been bad for baseball overall. You just can't maximize the benefit to baseball as an industry with Shohei Ohtani in Toronto, but you most certainly can with the Dodgers. They're always good. They're often disappointing in terms of what happens in October, but they're always good. There's an almost certainty that you'll see him in the playoffs. Maybe he gets deep into the playoffs. The team itself is a marquee team. They have a national following. They have all the resources to maximize this. They're one of the very few teams that can amortize this investment and actually make it profitable. $700 million just breaks the bank and breaks the previous paradigm. Everybody knows that. Cumulatively, about $300 million more than anybody else has gotten. But to use the word that's been thrown around about him for years, the guy's a unicorn, and so is this deal.
I'm trying to understand the Angels. You know, you lose him, you don't get any compensation, a draft pick or whatever, and you lose him to the Angels or the Dodgers. That's a bad weekend, Bob. But we could see this happening. You don't want to be the GM or owner who traded away Ohtani, but you don't want to be the owner or GM who didn't get anything for Ohtani when he left you.
Well, there was a lot of talk about this on the MLB Network at the trade deadline, of course. And at that point, the Angels, who seem to always sadly disappoint, they were only 3 or 4 games out of the last wild card. And I thought that Artie Moreno and the front office of the Angels actually kept faith with their fan base by saying, A, we're going to keep him, even if it's only for 2 more months, that you get to see this once, not in a lifetime, but once in forever in the history of baseball player. And we're going to make an effort, therefore, in the next couple of months and beyond, to retain him. Now, that effort was unsuccessful. The trapdoor opened on them. They plummeted to below 500. They were not in the race. But the day they announced that they were not going to put him on the trading block, you may remember this, they had a doubleheader in Detroit, a straight doubleheader, not a split, and pitched a complete game shutout or an 8-inning one-hit shutout, and then he hit 2 home runs as the DH in the next game. So at that point, spirits are high around the Angels. I can't blame them. I feel bad. I know there are criticisms of every owner when a team doesn't succeed, but you think about the Angels with Mike Trout, and then they got Pujols, and they got a good player instead of a great player. He was a great player with the Cardinals. What they wound up was with a good player for a while at the second half of his career. They signed Josh Hamilton. At that point, he was an MVP, and he had personal problems, and the trapdoor opened on him as well. They had Ohtani for a while and couldn't get to the postseason with Ohtani and Trout both. You can't say they didn't try. I mean, the Rendon signing, he comes off a World Series title and big RBI numbers with the Nats and doesn't do the same with the Angels. It feels like the whole franchise is snake bit.
I'm wondering Ohtani's impact on the game 10 years, 15 years down the road, where are teams going to be encouraging or not discouraging your pitcher from being a hitter or vice versa, college players? What kind of impact do you think Ohtani will have that way?
Yeah, I can't say precisely, Dan, but there's going to be some. Obviously, there's going to be some. And that the best player in high school always pitches and plays some position. And you get a little bit of that in college. And then, of course, they're channeled into whatever the scouts think is their best position or their college coaches thinks is their best position. But the best players, the most gifted players, at least start out being, many of them, pitchers and position players. And some of them, inspired by Ohtani, are going to want to try that.
We're talking to Bob Costas, Hall of Fame sportscaster, MLB Network host. Are we changing requirements on the Hall of Fame like we do with the NFL, where running backs are diminished, wide receivers getting more receptions and yards, and guys getting more sacks, and quarterbacks getting bigger numbers? What is baseball's sort of line of demarcation? Has anything really changed in the last 5 to 7 years?
I think analytics play a greater part in it because the younger members of the Baseball Writers Association who qualify, having been there for 10 years, as you know, Dan, it's only the writers who vote, broadcasters don't. But the younger guys are more dependent on analytics, and even the older guys have kind of caught up with that. So they may see some players through a different prism. That's the reason why you look at Bobby Abreu and somebody says, you know what, I can compare Bobby Abreu to Al Kaline, who back in the day was a no-doubt Hall of Famer, and you're looking at Bobby Abreu and scratching your head, but maybe analytics say that you should at least consider him. So that's part of it. But then, we've been over this before. Everybody's got to make their own decision about the steroid era. If you're going on pure numbers, McGwire, Sosa, Bonds, certainly Clemens, A-Rod, they're all in already. Manny Ramirez, all in already. How do you parse that, especially in light of the fact that it's reasonable to assume that some guys, even if they didn't testify before Congress or you don't have hard evidence, that some guys already at least dabbled in steroids during that period of time.
Do you think we ever get to the point where we go, younger voters, they just say, you know what, steroids not a big deal to me, and we're going to put all these guys in?
I think there's some sentiment in that direction. There's still a lot of hardliners who say no, and there's a handful, and I might be among them if I was a writer, who say I'm going to put Bonds and Clemens in a different category because I can rationalize that had they retired before the turn of the century, they would have been in on their natural merits, but I can't say the same for McGwire and Sosa. There's a school of thought that goes that way. But with each passing year, it seems that the hard line resistance to steroid guys lessens. And part of it is the writers who say, you know what, I just throw my hands up. I get it. I get that a lot of these performances are not fully authentic. I get that we're comparing apples to oranges, but I just can't figure out how to deal with it. So the heck with it. Everybody in whose numbers indicate they're going to get in.
Well, it's like Lance Armstrong. He was the best at cheating.
Yes.
I mean, Bonds was the best. If you said everybody gets to use steroids, that guy is so much better than everybody else. And maybe Clemens.
No doubt.
But Lance was so good in a sport so dirty. I'm like,
yes.
I don't know.
The example of that is that whether it's the Tour de France, I mean, I'm not an expert on cycling, but the various other events, I guess the Tour de France and the Olympics would be the two most prestigious ones. They don't award the prize to whoever finished second behind Lance Armstrong because they figure at least 1 through 25 were also on some kind of PEDs. What would they do? Some guy out for his morning cycle? Well, you on the side of the road. You're clean here. Take this.
Yeah. You with the Schwinn bicycle, you win. You won the next stage. I didn't even. Yeah, you win. You're the only guy clean. How does this Ohtani deal affect future free agents like Juan Soto? Does it affect?
It probably does a little bit, but I said this on Saturday when the news broke on MLBN. Every GM in baseball is now rehearsing the following speech to that star player and his agent. This is a high tide that raises no other boats because this guy is completely unique, and so is the Dodgers' circumstance. So this doesn't take a $30 million guy to 40. It doesn't even take an $8 million guy to 12. He's completely unique. Nobody else. Compare yourself to Judge. Compare yourself, if you're a pitcher, to Scherzer's deal or Verlander's deal. But this stands completely alone, and I don't want to hear about it. I don't know if that argument's going to carry the day or somebody will break ranks and move the next great player, not to Ohtani's level, but beyond Judge's level, beyond Trout's level and Harper's level and into the 50s or 60s, maybe. But I think by and large, you could make a reasonable argument that Ohtani is in a category of his own. And so the conversation does not include him when we come to the next guy.
Were you ever broached about being a GM of a team?
No, 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 no. And neither was I ever broached, despite all the talk about being commissioner of baseball. And I always said, I'm neither interested nor qualified. So forget it.
But don't be humble on this. You could have been commissioner. You could have been a really good commissioner.
I might have been a better commissioner than a GM.
Okay.
Who knows? I really don't think, honestly, that I was qualified, because there are aspects of it, grasp of economics, and especially all the backroom wheeling and dealing and twisting of arms. You have to have a certain kind of temperament for that, and I don't. And I always, the analogy I always used was, if you think a particular columnist is astute politically, that doesn't necessarily mean you think he or she should run for president or be a Supreme Court justice. Their role is to offer thoughts, and people weigh it for whatever it's worth. And I was a commentator about baseball, not just calling games, but about the state of the game. I even wrote a book about it. And if people appreciated that, well, that was my contribution.
Well, the press conferences would have sounded so much better if you were the commissioner.
I'll grant you that.
Okay, good. All right, fair enough. Bob, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
All right, Dan, one more thing.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with the rankings. When people watch Prime 9, I didn't even know what the rankings were until they handed me the script. And there are some of these rankings and exclusions that I don't agree with, so don't blame me.
Oh, you're distancing yourself. When I hosted Sports Century, people were mad when Secretariat got in there. I go, I didn't vote for the horse, but...
Well, believe me, when I found out Secretariat was roughly at the same level of ranking as Mickey Mantle, I wanted to strangle you. And I knew it wasn't your fault, but you were the guy whose name I knew. I didn't know who else was responsible.
I had people mad at me. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah. See you, Dan.
Bob Costas, Hall of Famer, MLB Network, and host of Prime 9. Yeah.